So he has thoughts for us this morning about Kabul and a perspective on these issues from Kabul, and also some slides. And so, Mr. Moulakis, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. It is a joy to have this opportunity to deepen old friendships and to make new ones, and I'm very grateful for the conference for having made that possible. And having made that possible in this beautiful place, which sees to it that land and water speak to each other in a way that appeals immediately to somebody like myself, who comes from a sea-loving and seafaring country. I am here, however, to speak about a landlocked country, about Afghanistan, in which I spent 2 years venturing to set up and to conduct an academic program, a university, an American seat of higher learning, the purpose of which is to bring best American practices to a country that needs them very badly and bring them to them in a manner that is respectful of their ways, to weave these practices into the texture of a society in such a way that they have a long-lasting effect in the great tradition of the magnificent places that America has planted overseas, such as the American University of Beirut or the American University in Cairo, that have affected the goodwill and the manner of the elites of great parts of the world in a much deeper way than any short-term slogan or any short-term program can do. And I think that we were doing not only a piece of education, but a piece of public diplomacy in the best sense. I would like to, I was asked to give you a view from Kabul. And I say a view rather than the view, for there are several. And I wanted to begin with a picture from the terrace of our house in Kabul. There we are. I'm there with colleagues. We are, of course, doing something which is against the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. But the reason I'm showing it to you is that there are things you can see from a terrace that you cannot see from the street. You can see big trees. You can see that the way in which the city developed. Now, there's a lot of elements you can see from our terrace, one of the best views in town, as a matter of fact. Kabul developed in an interesting way. Behind that mountain that you see there, there's a wall running up there, one of the oddest pieces of fortification in the world, running up the hill, supposedly to keep out the Arabs. That's what is always being said. There is a gate, and effectively a natural gate, and behind that is the old city, the medieval city, as it were. But what you have is a development over the 19th, especially during the 20th century, of, similarly to things like Regent's Park or Regent Street. In other words, a mixture of city planning and royal speculation, in which you have the development of Garden City, Sharinor, the new city, which is effectively the old city now, which is the heart of town, Wazir Akbar Khan, which is another princely development, and the part of the city that we are in, which was outside, where the university and our housing is in, on this side, which is in effect a garden town. And it must have been an extremely pleasant place before the Troubles. I don't know that it was ever particularly beautiful. You don't see in Kabul, like you do in a place like Herat or in Mazar, the signs of old empire. It's not, you don't see, Timurid minarets or great mosques, but it must have been an extremely pleasant garden town. You see none of this because everything is covered up with sandbags. Because every fence is made twice as high as it was before, and it is surmounted by barbed wire. Everything is surmounted by turrets and by guards, and the feeling is really one of snaking through a labyrinth of guardhouses. The other things you see here is a mosque, and it is a madrasa, in fact, a madrasa that is constructed with private funds, Persian funds, Iranian funds. It is a Shiite madrasa, and it is extremely intelligently made. First of all, it is an exact copy of a fabled shrine in Iran. It has perhaps the best library in the country, and it is a moment to make one think twice about what our calling is in making better educations available in that part of the world than what the madrasa has to offer. It is a challenge. What I will try to show you in a number of pictures is, I hope, the extraordinary mixture of vibrancy and squalor that is the life of Kabul. This is the city surrounded by these extraordinary mountains. You are at 6,000 feet. It is a situation very similar to that of Denver, where you are at 6,000 feet, and then the mountains rise precipitously up. And an early morning after a patch of snow is absolutely breathtakingly beautiful when the oblique light falls on the hills and lights it up. Also, let me say that underdevelopment has great advantages. The electricity that we heard about, in fact, there are two electricity lines coming down, one that was built by India, and you can see it loping down, all the way down from the Salang Pass across the mountains that we were shown the other day, coming down from Tajikistan, built, as I say, by India, much resented by Pakistan. And the reason you see it is there are so few power lines in Afghanistan that you see them when you see them. You cannot help but see them. And the new one from Uzbekistan that does provide electricity. But on the whole, electricity in Kabul is still weak. It only comes from time to time. There's very little public lights. And the result of this is that you have, from that terrace that I showed you, some of the most beautiful skies that you can imagine. The night skies in particular. Kabul is a city of maybe, nobody knows exactly, 3, 5, 7 million, nobody knows. It's, seriously, it's perfectly clear that there is an awful lot of people there. But, but nobody has counted them, and it is quite astonishing. But what I was going to say is that it is the only major city that I know over which you can see the Milky Way. It is, as I say, a strikingly beautiful place, and at the same time, a depressingly miserable one. And the two things go together, and they mix in a way also in the extraordinary character of that resilient and proud people who have lived down so many troubles and continue to do so with immense courage and fortitude. You have these houses climbing up the hills, most of them illegal, most of them without any proper sewerage and so on. If there were an earthquake, and there are frequent earthquakes in that part of the world, you could see it all tumbling down the hill. It is mostly mud brick, a very well-suited material to the climate and to the insulation. And this is the sort of street you might find. Again, this mixture of cheap modern and cheap old. And the street is generally like that. It's either mud or dust. The amount of dust is unbelievable. You have to consider again that the place is full of cars, the traffic is immense, and you have all the pollution that comes up from the generators that are used everywhere. So if you wake up in the morning, you can see over the next couple of hours the filth rising from the bottom up until you lose sight of everything around you. It is impossible to wear the same shirt all day without having 3 rings around your collar. It is. Again, I hope I can give you a sign. This is, again, the kind of shop you might find. And this is simply garbage being burnt at the edge of the street, and after it's been thoroughly picked through. The degree of indigence is very hard to imagine. People think of poverty, but this is not a poor Pakistan, this is not a poor Turkey. We're talking sub-Saharan conditions, very poor sub-Saharan conditions. We're talking about a per capita income of about $2 a day. We're talking about a life expectation of just over 40 years. We're talking about some of the worst infant mortality rates in the world. We're talking about a country that figures in the Human Development Index, which is that index which goes beyond merely economic indicators and includes education, health, and so on. It is in a list of 178 countries. It was 174th and is now 176th. It is not getting better, or it has not been getting better in that regard, although there has been improvements in some regards. The literacy rate is less than 20%, and is worse for women. Yes, the degree of indigence, as I say, is hard to imagine, and yet you have this extraordinary sense of beauty, this extraordinary sense of the good life. These are fishes fished out of the rivers in the area. They are displayed in this amazing way. Streets, again, full of vitality and enterprise. The roads are a lot like that. I shared a taxi with a USAID inspector who was flying in. I shared a taxi in Dubai to catch our red-eye plane to Kabul the next morning. He was a very nice man. He was flying in from Bangkok to do what he does, which is inspect roads. And he asked me very nicely, he had been to Kabul several times, he asked me to tell him about Kabul. And I said, well, you know it. He says, well, no, they just pick me up at the airport and they take me to the compound. And I don't see Kabul much. And in fact, last time I was there, there was some sort of event, and the roads were blocked, so I couldn't get to the airport. And so they took me through back roads. And you can't believe it, they were all unpaved. And so I asked, is there any other kind? He says, I know there is another kind, yeah, because we built them. I said, what you know is that you paid for them. Somebody spoke about empowering women and putting money in their pockets, and that's absolutely right. It is, again, difficult to imagine how hard it is to do that. In any country, no matter how poor, Somalia, Bangladesh, whatever, yeah, a woman can take a tray and take out shoes or fish or betel nuts or whatever it is. In Afghanistan, she cannot. There are no saleswomen in Afghanistan. There are some extraordinary things that have been done, partly, I'm proud to say, through our efforts in conjunction with a program that Goldman Sachs has established, namely 10,000 women, advancing their chances. And what we find is that they start brilliant ideas. For instance, a women's gym. In her own house, she starts a gym where only women can go. Terrific piece of business. You scratch the surface. Well, the house belongs to her father, the equipment belongs to her brother, and the business is her husband's anyway. And we're talking about people who are recruited from the, shall we say, informed elites. So it is very difficult to transfer these possibilities to people. That's a typical back street in Kabul. The world's most charming urchins. But they are effectively, if not orphans, they might as well be. They have to fend for themselves. It is really quite heartrending. And there are some people who do some good things for them. There is a fantastic foundation out of Colorado, I may say, that has organized children to collect rubbish in such a way that they make heating briquettes. And what it actually saves them from is not only indigence, but often prostitution, which is never spoken about, but is very widespread among the unprotected children. This is the Darul Aman Palace, which is one of the huge construction built by King Amanullah in imitation of the German Reichstag, and it looks like the Reichstag in 1947. It was first bombed by the Russians, restored, and then again bombed thoroughly by the different sides of the Afghan civil war. It is at the end of a huge alley that used to have magnificent trees. They were chopped down by magnificent, I mean, some of the sort of thing that even Paris would envy, that were chopped down to create free lines of fire by the Russians, and what was left became firewood very soon after. This is true throughout the country, a deforestation that is absolutely devastating. What you do find, one of the few businesses that flourish, are wedding palaces. This is one of them, the Paris Wedding Palace. Therefore, there is an Eiffel Tower in front of it. The one thing that Afghans will spend a lot of money on, whether they have it or not, is weddings. It is a sumptuary expense that is necessary to keep pace. People indebt themselves for a long time sometimes. For instance, one of our guards and our drivers who makes something between $200 and $280 a month has to figure out, he has to put aside $5,000 because otherwise his father-in-law won't let him take his chosen bride. And then you have places like this. These places are known in Afghanistan as Pakistani houses. Now, whether the reason, actually we live in one of those. We have, I think it's the only house I've ever known that has chandeliers on the balconies. And these chandeliers are very, very popular with the birds. They love it. And they use them as incubators. And it's all in this delicate, fine taste, you know, with broken mirrors and I'll show you another one. That's not the one, sorry. Let's go back if you don't mind. Why they're called Pakistani, I'm not entirely sure. It is possible that the models were picked up during exile in Peshawar and so on. I think what is much more likely is that it's the usual deprecating term for everything that Afghans don't like. Afghans detest Pakistanis and hate them with a red hot, at least in my experience, with a red hot passion. So anything that's awful, you call Pakistani. And I think this is part of it. These houses I lived in, well, we spoke about warlords. This is, of course, the source of much of the income. They are known also as poppy pop-ups. But there are other sources. The poppy, as we heard from Whitney yesterday, affects the lives of almost everyone. It goes across the classes, across the ethnic groups. It is everywhere. It is 1/3 of the economy. 1/3 of the economy. Afghanistan produces 90% of the world's opium. Opium is wonderful because it is a grateful crop. You don't have to do much. You just throw the seed and up it comes. And you can also collect it with very cheap labor, women and children. There's also a lovely story that women are particularly good at collecting the opium because they have such a light hand. That's a very convenient myth, I think. The interesting thing is that unlike, say, coca in Latin America, it is not a traditional crop. In olden times, people would have a few poppies. I mean, they're very beautiful, and apparently they make excellent salad, by the way, I'm told. Children will eat poppy seeds, and households would have a little bit of painkiller. But there was very little addiction. It's all a result of the war economy and the gaps that have been left behind. But mostly people who live in the houses that, let me also say that the solutions, and I think again Whitney put his finger on all the things that matter there, is that the profits in this are certainly not for the farmer. Yeah? The farmer makes a living because he can't make a living any other way. It is really in the risk premium. It is the profits go to people who can control the transport, who can control the protection both physical and metaphysical, if I may call it that. And of course, furthermore, the opium traders, warlords who profit from this are also narco-usurers. They extend loans that become necessary because of the sumptuous costs that are necessary in this traditional society. People indebt themselves and have to pay back at 500% in kind. If we, in our wisdom, go out and burn the crop, then of course the farmer is not off the hook, but the narco-usurer will come in and either chop your hand off or take your daughter. It is a cruel country. It is, though, above all, as again Whitney said so well, a donor-driven economy. It is a double-decker economy. The people who live in those houses, there are no offices being built in Kabul. There are these houses being built and nothing else. Nothing else. The only things that work are things like the telecom companies, the airlines who serve the foreign community, and what pass for banks. I say what pass for banks because they are just places where you bring your money and they hold it, and then if you go and clamor enough, they will give it back to you. These are the only, as we said, and this is a deep-seated problem, and kickstarting the economy, which is absolutely essential, especially in job-making things. And I think the neglect of agriculture in this regard is particularly pernicious in what has been happening in Afghanistan and what has been a traditional agricultural society. It is it's a double-decker economy. It is an economy in which NGOs, including our own agencies, including our own university, pay the sort of salary that people could not imagine otherwise. This depletes the pool of capable people in the real economy. People with skills do not work for Afghan ministries. People with skills work for the Red Cross, for the Dutch Embassy, for something like that. Furthermore, there are really, I think it is very important to distinguish between two different types of aid, especially if we're about to splurge into a peace surge or a civilian surge. There really are two kinds of aid. I think there's humanitarian aid, which is terrific and which works. Yeah, you go in when there is a natural or a crisis or a war, and you come in with the blankets and with the tents and with the aspirin and whatever is necessary, and you save people's lives. And then there's development aid. Yeah, and development aid is a much more difficult affair. A much more difficult affair because despite the best of intentions, it often has the opposite conditions. What it leads is, of course, to, and Ambassador Schäfer will pardon me if I'm critical of some of our agencies in that regard as well, and she will scold me for being perhaps not quite as fair as I might be, but I could really quote incredible stories of incompetent pomposity on the part of some of our agencies and of waste, and I could not put my finger on corruption, but the delivery of services leaves something to be desired. But the dilemma is a very great one. The dilemma is that unless, and then let me say that all these services, not just our own, but things like the Red Cross, people like all kinds of excellent agencies, are faced with the dilemma of either delivering the service themselves or having the local agencies take care of it. The Ministry of Health, say, yeah, you have to give so and so many injections against polio, whatever, yeah? Well, if you give the local health institutions the opportunity to do it, chances are it won't get done, or it won't get done well, that the facilities will be abused, and that a lot of the resources will end up in Dubai. On the other hand, if you don't, you undermine the authority of the state you're trying to build up, and you undermine its capacity to deliver because the good people work for you and not for the government. So that there is a vicious circle there which is built into this NGO world that we live in. What will happen to those houses when the NGOs move out? What will happen to the donor-moved economy when there are no donors anymore? Because it is not kickstarting anything. It is merely revolving upon itself. I could, again, tell you perhaps in the discussion, give you some examples of what it's like to go to these ministries, from the Ministry of the Interior to the Ministry of Education to the Ministry of Information that was mentioned yesterday as having a capable deputy minister, which is absolutely true. They actually are also the Ministry of Censorship. When we had the Encyclopedia Britannica sent up to us, a wonderful cheap edition from India, and we were very glad to be able to put our hands on it, they confiscated 3 volumes. Now, I imagine at the border, and I imagine for the Ministry of the Interior, of the Information had to be brought in. And the reason for this is, I imagine there must have been a picture of the Venus de Milo in one of them. But I still don't know why they confiscated the index volume, which is still with them. This, on the other hand, is one of the wonderful things. This is the tomb of Babur, of the great emperor who started the Mughal Empire in India, who hated India. He liked India because it was rich, but hated its weather, and loved Kabul because it is a wonderfully cool and lovely place and has the world's most beautiful roses. To this day, the world's most beautiful roses. And it is perfectly restored, this garden, by the Aga Khan. The Aga Khan, who has done enormous amounts of things in Asia, including a university in Kyrgyzstan, a university in Karachi that serves health in particular. He has transformed the biggest rubbish heap in the world, which was in Cairo, into one of the most fabulous gardens in the new Azhar. And this is, again, typical of the work the Aga Khan does, in perfect taste, using the best people in a way that is modest and superb and lifting of the spirits of a place that need moments of peace and moments of beauty on which to rest. This is a usual checkpoint going up to the mountains. You see how well equipped the army is. The army, by the way, as Barney Rubin had pointed out, we're going to build up the Afghan army, and God bless us, we really ought to, yeah? But as Barney Rubin pointed out, if the Afghan state were in a position to collect all the taxes that are its due, which is a very unlikely prospect, it could barely be able to pay for the army alone. Not a single other salary, not an office, not a street, not any other services provided for. So we may build up the army, but it will have to still come from supplementary votes in the United States Congress. One way to build an independent country. This is, of course, our boys going through town. They are wonderful people. Of all the foreigners that I met working in Afghanistan, I admired the soldiers the most. They were the most straightforward, the ones most critical in a way, the ones most aware of what it means to be at war, the ones most aware of what it meant to bring other people to danger. I was full of admiration from what I saw, and I was very impressed. And I don't come from a military background. I mean, I grew up in a house that doesn't so much own as much as a sling, but it is impressive. However, this is the effect, and these can be American, they can be French, they can be Italian, they can be Greek, they can be Turkish, they can be Macedonian even. Even Macedonia has a... and what you have is these things really rattling down the street, down the middle of the street. And these streets are full of people, full of push carts, full of animals, full of sheep and what have you. And the way you cross a street or drive in a street, and the number of lanes in either direction, if lanes be the right word, is entirely negotiable, is that you just don't look but move. Yeah? And somehow it works. Somehow it works. Of course, these guys have to get from one point to another fast. They are exposed to grave danger. They're exposed to all kinds of things. And therefore, they are very nervous. Yeah? They ride on these things, and there's one guy on top in the turret with a big black glove that goes like this, which people think means hi. Yeah. But actually, it means get out of my way or else. And they have a very nervous trigger. On the other hand, Afghans, being intelligent people, recognize that you can get a toe out of that. They make a path that you can clear through the... so they follow, and they tend to follow up too close. And one of these boys turns around and shoots them to bits and pieces. These things happen. They run over children. It happens, yeah? So in response to this, quite sensibly, General McChrystal issued an order. But the terms in which he issued it came out very strangely. Yeah? He said that from now on, that convoys that travel in Afghanistan will have to obey Afghan traffic laws. This is, you saw the tank fall on the side of the street. You find them everywhere. And by the way, because, again, Afghans are very careful people, these tanks or other things are stripped to everything can be removed. There is not a bolt left on them. There is not a chain left on them. Anything can possibly be removed has been removed and reused. This is a house on the way going up to Panjshir, where Masood had his headquarters and so on, yeah, which, as you see, is largely built with spent bombshells. This is one of the main assets of the Panjshir. When the Russians moved in, they started shelling. And out of the shelling, they discovered that they blew up emeralds. Emeralds became one of the sources of wealth and one of the sources of financing the Northern Alliance. The manner of mining emeralds has remained very similar. It is the, you know, the opulence of the East. You live in a shower of emeralds. It is, and the explosive is often collected from unspent ordnance that's out there. It's not an easy life, but it tells you how pragmatic people are in the end. There's perfectly good stuff. Why waste it? Build a wall with it. I only have a few seconds, and therefore, look at these lovely children. That I wanted you to see. This is a school. This is a school. The back is a school building, as it were. The front is the real school, these tents, winter and summer. This is it's not in some faraway place. This is in the immediate suburbs of Kabul. I will close on this, and I will say only that the problem with education is not school buildings. The problem with education is teachers. And you cannot train teachers, especially not teachers for girls, because girls have to be taught by women teachers. And if you start with illiteracy, if learning is geometrical, non-learning, and it's very difficult to penetrate into the mind of an illiterate person, non-learning is not a submultiple of the learning that you have. It is a square root. It is impossible to build up capacity until educational possibilities improve. And there are improvements, as Rashid was saying, but the starting point is extremely low. The possibilities of development are extremely remote. And therefore, I hope, and I will stop there and say more perhaps in our discussion because my time is up, that I hope that with the help of the generosity of the American people, we have been able to cast a ray of hope on that extraordinary, brave, and much, much, much harried people who are the Afghans. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.